Looks like people are still joining. We'll do maybe one more minute and then we can jump in. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. It is good to be back doing these meetings. We're excited to touch base again with everyone and have an opportunity to kind of talk through what we've been working on and what we have ahead of us, and just share sort of where some of the exciting updates, and kind of the progress that we're continuing to make with the Pathways Initiative. So this probably will not be a full 90-minute meeting, but we did want to give opportunities for people to ask questions and make comments. So maybe we can happy to take questions along the way, and then if people want to, if there's any additional comments, we can touch base again at the end. But we will walk through today just an update since it's been a few months since we've been together. Wanted to just remind everyone what the formation committee is looking like. Talk a little bit about the recent legislation that was introduced in California and the timeline for that. Brief update on our funding, talk a little bit about our work plan at a high level as we're looking forward, and then touch on some upcoming opportunities for stakeholder engagement. So let's go ahead and jump in. Just starting with sort of where we are on kind of an organizational standpoint. As a reminder, part of our recommendation in our Step 2 proposal was to create a formation committee that would be a subcommittee of the launch committee tasked with working on the implementation of our Step 2 proposal. And this is a group of folks that have served on the launch committee, who represent 7 different sectors. This was not meant necessarily to be all sector inclusive. We're also not trying to exclude anyone, but wanted to make sure that we didn't have any duplicative sectors on here represented. But again, the launch committee is still our decision-making body. So anything that any work product that we're developing, anything that varies from the Step 2 proposal, just because, reality is maybe it's creating different opportunities or challenges versus what we had in our Step 2 proposal. All of those things are going back to the launch committee. So that full group of stakeholder representatives will be the group that is reviewing and really adopting all of the work product and, again, any changes that we might need to the proposal that we put out last fall. So I'm continuing to chair the formation committee. We also have Michelle Beck from the Utah Office of Consumer Services, Elaine Ginocchio from Western Resource Advocates, Evie Call from Cal CCA, Scott Ranzel from Pacific Gas and Electric, Jim Shetler from Bank, and Lisa Torman Hickey from representing the Interwest Energy Alliance. And that's the group that is getting together at least weekly now to really start to figure out how can we actually implement the work that we all agreed upon from last fall. Next slide, please. In addition to our formation committee members, we have some liaisons, and these are representatives from the body of state regulators, the Western Energy Market Governing Body, and the CAISO Board of Governors. All of these folks are there to contribute ideas and provide feedback, but they are not voting members. They are not making any decisions either on behalf of the formation committee or their respective bodies, but are already providing really valuable input and kind of feedback as we go. Again, these are folks that have been engaged in this work from the get-go, from the bosser and the governing body and the board perspectives. And so being able to share their expertise and experience with the formation committee as we're developing some of our implementation recommendations is going to be really critical. So Commissioner Dumit from Washington, Commissioner Hammond from Idaho, and Commissioner Houck from California have been attending our meetings, and we are extremely grateful for their time and participation. Governing body members Andy Campbell and John Prescott have also been joining us, and then Governor Shorey from the CAISO board. And we are, again, extremely grateful to have their time and expertise, and look forward to continuing to run ideas and get some feedback on our implementation work. Next slide, please. A couple of other things that we wanted to mention related to the formation committee and the work that we're doing ahead of us. The CAISO staff, as they have been since the get-go, is also continuing to serve in a technical and advisory role. And so, again, not decision makers, not influencing the direction, but helping us identify the limits and opportunities on what is possible. And so helping us understand the way things work today, so that as we're talking about how we implement changes to, for example, the stakeholder process, understanding what those changes and what that transition might need to look like. So the CAISO team has been involved in this advisory role, which has been extremely valuable along the way and continues to be a good partnership. Another couple things that I wanted to mention, the launch committee and the formation committee as part of that is not engaging in any sort of lobbying, and the pathways work is any sort of lobbying at the California legislature or anywhere else. So even though there is a bill moving through the California legislature, the launch committee and formation committee are not formally engaging on that. Individual members of the launch committee are engaging, and they are engaging on their organization or individual behalfs. So we'll talk a little bit about what that bill is and what it does, but we are not formally engaged in any way. In addition, we have, as we've been starting to talk about the implementation of this proposal, we felt that it was really important for us all to set this kind of foundational principle and to communicate it, that none of the work that we're doing will interfere with the ongoing operations of the energy imbalance market or the implementation of the extended day-ahead market. Those things are critical, and we want to make sure that we are cognizant as we're talking about transitioning the governance over those markets to a new independent body, that the actual operations of those market services can remain unhindered, that the WEM governing body, for example, has full authority and governance over those market services until we have the point at which it transfers over to the new regional organization, so that will feel seamless to the market participants. And we think that's really important, obviously for consumers and for the broader region, that those market services can continue to operate and develop as they need to. Before we jump into the legislation, any questions about sort of the formation committee and kind of how we're set up? Really, it's kind of a structural thing. We'll talk a little bit about our work plan and what the sort of what we have ahead of us a little later in the agenda, but just wanted to give a chance if there's any questions about that. All right, and we can check back in, of course, at the end. And I'm going to pass it now over to Evie Call, who's going to talk a little bit about the legislative update and the process going on in California.
Yeah, good morning. And as a California stakeholder, we're really excited that a bill was introduced in California last week to enable step 2 of the Pathways Initiative. And we are doubly delighted that it was introduced by 2 authors from the Energy and Utilities Committee, Senator Becker and Senator Stern. So it bodes well that we are well placed within the Energy Committee. IBEW was a key sponsor of the bill and did the heavy lifting really to support the bill development. And it has been joined by EDF and NRDC as co-sponsors. So again, good setup for the bill. What it does is essentially it adds a new section to the Public Utilities Code, which is section 345.6, which you've probably browsed through. And it really has 4 sections, and I'll walk through each of them in order. So subdivision A of the bill provides authority for the CAISO and the IOUs to participate in markets that are governed by a new regional organization, provided that that organization has certain characteristics. Essentially, the characteristics that are provided in A1 through 12 mirror the step 2 proposal, which wasn't, on accident. It's very much by design. And it includes several key proposals that are included on this slide here. And they've been very important to stakeholders all the way along. Public interest protections will be incorporated into the organization's bylaws. Specific roles and engagement with state regulators and consumer advocate offices are addressed by the bill. It requires transparent and accessible operations and public participation. It has independent market monitoring and analysis. And then there's also a structure set up to engage with states and local power authorities and federal power marketing agencies to evaluate impacts of the proposed rules. So it really takes the public interest into account in setting up the characteristics that are required for the regional organization. Then if you go to subdivision B, what it does is it lays out the process for the CAISO to implement necessary tariff modifications. And it will ultimately have to provide a resolution stating that the RO has the required characteristics, those identified in subdivision A. And there's a whole public process that will be around the development of that resolution. Going to subdivision C, and that addresses what would happen in the event the IOUs or CAISO needed to exercise withdrawal rights from the RO. And that is something that every state will need to consider. What if something happens? How will that be addressed? So subdivision C basically acknowledges that the PUC has the right to direct withdrawal, and that if it withdraws, the CAISO needs to stand ready to serve that withdrawn market. And then subdivision D limits the scope of authority of this bill to energy markets. So we can't have the CAISO and the IOUs participate in transmission operations, transmission planning, all of the other pieces of the puzzle if they are governed by the RO. But what subdivision E does is it enables the CAISO to provide a suite of vendor services to the RO. And we talked about this a lot during the development of the proposal. And the CAISO will be able to offer services to the RO that go beyond energy market operation to transmission, balancing authority services, transmission planning, and other service areas, which might allow some co-optimization of the California function with the RO functions. And then finally, the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, lays out the California legislative cycle, assuming that there are no assembly amendments to the bill. And I think the 2 key dates to note are that the legislature will adjourn on September 12th So the bill has to be enacted on or before that date, and the governor has a month to sign or veto the bill. So Cal CCA, and I know a number of us on this call are looking forward to working with California stakeholders to support the bill's passage.
Thanks, Abby. Maybe we'll pause here for a second. Are there any questions about the bill? Again, this is not official launch committee business, but we certainly do have folks on this call who are engaged and have been working on this. Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren Tenney Dennison from Public Power Council. Thanks for that overview. And you discussed some of the implementation pieces. I think the bill has a date in there that the tariff could start being implemented in January 2027. Please correct me if that's wrong. But I was curious if the launch committee folks or formation committee could speak a little bit to what that means for timing of standing up the RO, if anything.
Yeah, we have slides, I think, later on to talk about that path, but essentially it will take that much time or more to actually get the RO stood up. I'll leave that to Kathleen for later.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about it. I think we're still in the process of trying to figure out all of the details, and but I think what Abby said is absolutely spot on. This is, as we think about what we have ahead of us and recognizing part of the way we set this up, and this goes back to our step 2 proposal from November. We well, actually, let me pause on this for 1 second. Because we'll go out of order a little bit. Let me touch on the funding, and then I'll come back to this work plan timing and talk through all of that. In the meantime, so Lauren, I'll come back to that question. Any other questions about the bill or the legislative process itself at this point? All right, fabulous. Okay, next slide, please. So we have talked in the past, the Pathways Initiative through our fiscal sponsor Global Impact was one of the awardees of some funding from the Department of Energy last year. Given some of the cuts and uncertainty with the federal government, that funding is currently on hold. And so we're awaiting additional communication from DOE. So I don't really have an update for that, but we're continuing to move forward with our developments so that we can continue to make progress. And once we have additional certainty, we'll certainly update stakeholders. But we'll make the adjustments as needed. With or without that DOE funding, the RO is going to need additional funding. So the grant award was a little north of $900,000, and we're in the process of developing a budget for the work that we're going to need to do between now and sort of the go live date of the new regional organization. And that includes everything from our, having legal counsel review various documents. It includes seating a board, ongoing facilitation costs. So there's quite a bit of things that we're going to need to do to set this up in a way that achieves the proposal, the components of the proposal from last fall. And that really accomplishes the foundational principles of having an independent board and some of the changes to the stakeholder process and those kinds of pieces. So we're working on that right now. We will have a draft budget to share with stakeholders probably later this spring as we continue to figure out recommendations around staffing and things like that. And so we will also be able to use that budget to start to have conversations about where will that additional funding come from. So recognizing that all of our work thus far has been funded by a variety of stakeholders, and we are extremely grateful for that support and commitment. We also recognize that some of this is the forward momentum is also contingent in many ways on what happens in the legislature. So we're trying to balance that timing and balance those needs as we look to the future. Next slide, please. So getting back to the work plan, when we put out our step 2 proposal in November, we had sort of three phases of work for the formation committee to undertake, really starting at the beginning of this year. The first phase of this is what we're calling our pre-implementation and preparation activities. And these are things that we're working on to essentially get ready to be able to incorporate the organization and apply for our nonprofit status once we have a bill passed and signed in California. And so not wanting to get ahead of that process, but making sure that we are continuing to work on the things that we can work on so that we are ready to go at that point. So really between now and October, we are working on drafting and finalizing the corporate documents and the IRS application. We're working on finalizing our nominating committee process that will be that we'll use to seat the RO board. We're going to continue to work on the stakeholder process and refining the recommendations that we had, as well as really working closely with the RIF and with the CAISO on how we transition and implement some of those changes, recognizing that, as we discussed so much over the course of the last year, the stakeholder processes that people engage in have sort of a culture of their own, and as things change, that culture has to change. And so, wanting to be able to implement new aspects of this stakeholder process in chunks that are digestible and achievable, and don't throw the whole thing on its head, wanting to make sure that we are able to do these things successfully. So we're really intending to take the time that we need to continue to develop that recommendation and work on implementation over the course of the next, really just moving forward. It'll be a sort of a constant improvement process, we think. As I mentioned too, we're working on drafting our initial budget and a staffing plan. This includes staff for the Office of Public Participation, which, as we recommended in the proposal, is part of the RO staff. So the Office of Public Participation, which will enable engagement, it'll help stakeholders and the public identify, understand how to engage in these processes. It'll have some explainers and really be kind of the public facing, translate some of these really complicated things into something that is accessible. That is staff that will be at the RO and will require some funding. The Consumer Advocate Organization is going to be a separate organization, but funding for that will, as we've recommended in our proposal, will come from the tariff. And so making sure that as we're developing our budget moving forward for the RO, that is included in there from the beginning. And then ultimately, we will file our documents with the IRS once we have a bill signed and we're ready to go. So the next phase, once we're past the legislation, will be additional activities prior to seating a permanent regional organization board. So again, we'll start the nominating committee process to identify those candidates for the permanent board. We'll continue to refine the staffing and budget plan for the RO. And then begin the implementation of those stakeholder process changes. We're also going, at this point, we're going to be working on the key principles that will be included in the tariff change that will be necessary to enable the transfer of the governance over the EIM and EDAM from the WEM governing body over to the new RO board, as well as the key principles that will be embodied in the service agreement between the RO and the CAISO. And so as we develop these stakeholder or these key principles, there will be opportunities for stakeholder input on those pieces as we start to move forward. And then the formation committee will provide support to the consumer advocates as they take on the formation of the consumer advocate organization. So we anticipate that this process really will probably take us somewhere into the middle of next year, 2026. Wanting to get an RO board seated to make sure that we can that the RO is really starting to take the driver's seat and be able to be a counterparty with the CAISO for the development of these changes and to really start to figure out how is the RO going to operate and function as an independent organization. So the third phase, which is in blue, and the blue really denotes that this is the point at which the RO is going to be starting to kind of take control, and that the RO board will really be responsible for these tasks. The launch committee and the formation committee will still be here to assist as the RO board needs it, especially because there won't really, at least at the outset, won't be staff in place yet. So wanting to make sure that we can continue the work and the momentum that we've started. So the RO board at this point will really take on developing its own work plan for the transition of all of these components. It'll take on hiring the initial staff members, which will include an executive director, legal counsel, and then additional staff as the implementation sort of requires. The timing of these pieces is still yet to be determined because it's a little far out at this point. And then it will really be working very closely with the CAISO to go through the requisite stakeholder processes beyond what we've been doing and what we will continue to do through the launch committee and formation committee. There will be formal stakeholder processes for the tariff changes and, again, the key components of the CAISO and RO agreement. And then ultimately, the RO as its own independent entity will finalize its contract negotiations with the CAISO, and then there will be, and then the agreement and the tariff will be filed at FERC. So recognizing that the process, having an adequate stakeholder process for these components is going to take some time, and having a nominating committee go through a full board search process, going through a full search process to hire those initial key staff. The launch committee feels pretty confident that 2027 date that's in the legislation, it will not be too early. And so I think we are committed, again, not to get in the way of the operations of the EIM or EDM. We're committed to taking the time to do an adequate amount of stakeholder process to make sure that we are getting the input that we need, and really continuing to refine the recommendations as we look forward, and put these things into reality. So we do anticipate that this is a process that's going to take some time, and we are we're working on a more detailed work plan and timeline that we will bring back to stakeholders probably at our meeting next month. And so to that end, next slide, our opportunities for engagement. We are committed to continuing to have these monthly check-in meetings with stakeholders. And they will probably be both an update and and at some point we'll have probably incorporate some workshops into those updates. So as we develop our draft work products and proposals for the implementation of these recommendations, we will have workshops and public comment opportunities for stakeholder engagement to make sure, again, that we are having this ongoing dialogue as we get through this implementation work. So I know this is kind of high level right now. We still need to have more detailed conversations with the launch committee on the work plan and the timeline. And so we will have more of those details probably at our March meeting next month. So I know there's a couple questions here in the chat, and then also happy to take additional comments, questions. This is really the bulk of the information that we had to share at this point. All of this organization has taken some time. There's a lot of details involved in this. And again, we want to make sure that we've got full buy-in from the launch committee as we continue to move forward. So first question in the chat, could you comment on the interaction with FERC and the timeline? We've sort of set this work out to get us to the point where we will not be filing anything with FERC until we have the tariff change fully stakeholdered and the agreement between the RO and the CAISO finalized. And so that is sort of towards the end of this timeline. We are thinking that by the time we get FERC approval, we'll have all of the pieces in place so that we can, the RO can go live. It will be ready to go live. And again, this is kind of tying back to the bill in California. The CAISO will have to certify all of those pieces, and then we would be able to make that governance transition. Amanda, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. And then Mike, EDAM will launch under the current governance arrangement and transition once the RO is ready to go? Yes. So we do not want this to impact the current 2026 go live date for EDAM. So this will be happening in parallel of the implementation of EDAM. Just going to keep ripping through the chat questions here. Vijay, what if any linkage will exist between the current WEM board and future RO board? This is not in the legislative proposal, but this is essentially because the WEM governing body is the governance structure over the EIM and EDAM. It will be a transition from that structure to the RO board. What we envisioned in our proposal is that there are likely to be all governing body members who might be interested in continuing to serve on the RO board and transition over to that. And so we have set up in our recommendation that any of those governing body members who are interested in continuing to serve would automatically be put into the process, and would still have to go through end up on the vetting process and end up on the slate for voting, but that there is sort of there's some of that initial process piece that would be that box would already be checked.
Thank you. Thank you.
Contingency plans should SB 540 stall. Well, I think and happy to let anybody else. I'm just kind of ripping through these. If any of my other launch committee or formation committee members want to chime in here too, please feel free to come on. with SB 540, as Evie mentioned, that this is the bill that enables the California utilities to participate in markets that are governed by an independent entity. If 540 stalls, I think we have to have a conversation at that point about whether or not we still think it is valuable to create the new RO with the recommendations that we developed for the rest of the West. But it really does change the nature of what we are, what the full Pathways Initiative proposal was meant to do, and that was to create a situation where that enables California to be part of that footprint. So it is a pretty it is a critical component of being able to achieve that goal. And if it stalls, I think we'll have to figure out, again, is it stalling? Is it gone? We'll have to revisit and continue to have those conversations. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in here. All right, we'll go with that. All right, next question. Does the launch committee's work assume that individual EDAM BAAs will remain in sole control of their tariff and business practice stakeholder processes? Yes, I think. Now we're getting out of my realm of expertise. I don't know if there's.
So Das, if you are talking about oversight over the participating transmission owners' transmission tariffs, they definitely will remain in control of their own transmission tariffs. Is there something else you're asking about?
It must have been the other D. Williams. Was it? It
Sorry,
wasn't me.
okay.
It's okay, Evie.
Yeah, I'll just add, because there's been a number of questions that I've received related to the legislation. So those outside of the CalISO, but still California balancing authorities, they do not need the legislation to participate in the RO. And they will continue to operate their balancing authorities. They will continue to have control over their own actions. The legislation itself won't impact any of those decisions they get to make. They also do not have to meet those contingency criteria that would allow the CalISO to move forward. Those things are separate and distinct for the balancing authorities that are not currently part of the CalISO. So I just want to put that out there, because a number of folks have been asking me questions related to the publicly owned utilities and some of the balancing authorities.
Thanks, Randy. Dan, if you have a follow-up, please feel free to jump in. Robert, your question. Outside the DOE funding, have you identified any other uncertainties stemming from the current political environment that could be problematic for the progress of establishing the RO on your expected timeline? Anything you're particularly paying attention to? I think at this point in time, we feel confident that the work that we have ahead of us until we get to that point where we need to file something at FERC should be able to continue to progress without any other challenges. And so that is this is really the development and a lot of work from these stakeholders and ensuring that we've got the input and dialogue that we need from the West. But at this point, we don't have any other, we don't foresee any other challenges directly on the work that we're going to be doing. Certainly there's a lot of, there are a lot of challenges associated with what's happening that impact, some of our partners. And we're sensitive to that, but directly for the work that we're doing, we think we're going to be able to continue to move forward. Again, the California legislature is the other sort of piece that is not directly within our control. And we'll be working through that process. Any other questions or comments at this point? Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you, Dan. Question was whether the RO would have any oversight of EDM BAAs, including the CAISO EDM BAA. For example, coordinating tariff provisions and business practices, establishing uniform stakeholder process expectations. I think I need a lifeline here. This is.
Yeah, and I guess, Dan, not us, I'll ask, are you talking about the transmission owner tariffs that each of the BAAs has? Is that what we're talking about? Yes, okay. Yeah, the RO has no involvement in those tariffs. The transmission owner will set their tariff, and there may need to be some changes to the tariff to recognize the integration into the RO, but no, the RO has no authority over the transmission tariff of the individual BAA participants.
All right, great. Thank you, Abby. The next question, have you worked with CAISO to advise you on what would happen technically if one, legislation passes, but then two, at a later date, the California BAA decides to exit the RO? I think we have just barely begun those conversations. This is, certainly this is a conversation that we would have to, a topic that we'd have to think about for any balancing authority that would want to withdraw from the market services. So, and the CAISO being, obviously a key one, but we've not dived too far into that topic at this point. Abby, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think we can say, based on the legislation, that the legislation is asking the CAISO to stand ready in the event withdrawal were to happen. And if withdrawal were to happen, obviously the CAISO still has all of the capabilities to operate the market because it will be doing it on behalf of the RO. And it would also need, however, to go to FERC to get a tariff approved. They've got a tariff today that does what we need to do. So presumably it would be some version of that tariff adapted to the circumstances at the time. Does that answer your question?
Great. Thanks, Abby. And just as a reminder, I mean, these are voluntary markets. And so each of the market participants has the ability to withdraw if that is something that they feel they need to do. So this is not unique to the CAISO Balancing Authority. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Well, we look forward to bringing you additional details and information next month. Just as a reminder, all of our website and our email addresses are all continuing to be active. Please reach out if you have any questions. And we're just excited to be able to keep moving on this and keep our progress going. And really look forward to engaging with all of you as we actually have some stuff to chew on and the implementation moves forward. So thank you all again, and we'll see you in a month.